Right, folks, I'm really sorry that I'm having to record this. So, yeah, I can't do anything else than apologise. I'm going to do my very best to give you the same sort of experience as if I was there. I'm going to record as much of this as I possibly can. And if you obviously just do your best, and we'll pick up on this next lesson. And you can, of course, email me if you get in a complete pickle. And as soon as I'm available today, I'll reply to you and try and help you. Okay, so this is a rough idea of what we're doing, starting off with my apology and then those other 4 things. Okay, so the song. Don't worry, you don't have to learn it. I just thought some of you might enjoy it. Some of you probably won't. It is, I don't know what genre it is really. They're a folk group, but I wouldn't have called it folk, to be honest. I'm not much of a musician, so I don't know. Anyway, it's a song by an Exeter band called Show of Hands, and it's a song all about the kinds of stuff that we have been talking about for rural areas. The lyrics are on page 33. So here is my electronic copy of the module booklet. And just to give you, so one of the lyrics here. And the red brick cottage where I was born is the empty shell of a holiday home. And it talks about the pubs closing down. It talks about a complete change in everyone's way of life because of the decline of the primary sector and all of the associated issues. So it's just a different way of learning part of the module, really. Apologies if you hate it, but this is the link to the actual song and its video. So I'd really appreciate it if you had a listen. And if you can hear my dog eating her breakfast in the background, I can only apologise. Right, so we have had one attempt at these. Today is going to be attempt number 2. And if we still are in a complete pickle, obviously I don't want you getting too worried about that. So what you are going to need, please, is you're going to need either an electronic copy or a paper copy of the module booklet, and you're going to need a ruler and a pencil would be my advice. So I'm first of all going to remind you about how you read them, and then we're going to attempt to plot. Okay, so I've got my drawing utensils. If I was looking at this red dot here, if I wanted to find out the percentage of people in the primary sector, I have to follow the horizontal axis. So I know that for this red dot, 40% of people work in the primary sector. For the secondary sector, I have to follow that grid line. And I find that 20% of people work in the secondary sector, and then 40%. You can see why a ruler is helpful. And the check, ladies and gents, is that the 3 numbers should add up to 100. 40 plus 40 plus 20 adds up to 100. Perfect. And if we were going to repeat that, for the blue dot, it's 10% primary, 80% secondary, 10% tertiary. 80, 10, 10 adds up to 100. So just check that you can do that, and then you can have a go at this. So this table and this blank triangular graph are both in your module booklet, but of course you can use them on here if that's easier. You are not plotting every single one of these countries, all right? That would be bonkers. And I would encourage you to do a little bit of rounding. So for example, Nigeria is quite nice and straightforward. Ethiopia is quite nice and straightforward. But if I was going to be plotting the UK's, I would probably be doing some rounding down and rounding up. But remember, the 3 numbers have got to add up to 100. So otherwise it's just a nonsense. Okay, so rounding is fine. Hopefully you will remember how to do that from GCSE. I am going to plot, which one shall I plot? I will plot Bangladesh. Okay, so let me do my drawing. I'm going to plot this one here. Right. I'm going to ask you to plot 5, any 5 that you want to. It doesn't make any difference to me. So the first thing you need to do is you need to label your axes. I'm going to go for exactly the same as on the previous slide. So that's going to be my primary, that's going to be my secondary, and that's going to be my tertiary. Okay? So 45% primary. There's 40, there's 45. So what I do is I get my ruler, I find 45, and I'm going to draw a line all the way across. I appreciate that my highlighter is quite a broad line, but I've chosen it so it shows up really nicely. So 45 is going to be somewhere across there. Industry is 30, right? So here's 30, and I know I need to use these grid lines. So I know that my dot is going to be here, and all the third dot does really is confirm that. Tertiary sector 25, so I need to go from here up, and hey presto, look, all of the things meet there. So what I will do is I will draw a little red dot there, and then I would put a little key, red dot. Excuse my writing with the mouse, I don't find it very easy, as you can see. Right, so some of you will get this like that and you'll be like, yeah, Nikki, this is fine. And some of you will be really stuck and find this really hard. Just have a go for me at plotting 5 of these countries on here, and we can pick up on it next lesson and see how you got on, okay? Best wishes, ladies and gents. I should just point out that there are quite a few videos on YouTube, not made by me, of other geography teachers trying to explain these, and it might be that somebody else's explanation just kind of clicks for you. So you're always welcome to do that. Right, I need to remind you of this lovely thing. I will probably talk about this graph most lessons of this module, and actually beyond. It's one of my favourites because it explains so much. This is the Clark-Fisher model, and it shows you the changes that you would expect in our employment sectors over time. And you can add, if you want, an arrow on the x-axis which just says time. The idea being, as we know, the primary sector will gradually decrease because people get replaced by machines, because it's difficult, it's dangerous, it's low paid. People, if they have a choice, don't really want to work in it. So the primary sector decreases. That leads to job losses, people moving away, loads of problems in the countryside, of course, because that's where the primary sector tends to be. And we've looked at the rural idyll, the rural reality, and we've also talked about rural rebranding, this idea that what we're desperately trying to do now is to create jobs in the countryside and to get people back in the countryside spending their money. And hopefully you guys have all picked out a case study that you can use for that. We're now, today, going to be talking about the secondary sector. So the secondary sector is making things, it's manufacturing, factories, however you want to think about it. And in the UK, this bit was called the Industrial Revolution, and it happened mostly in the Victorian times, where we started using water and steam power and coal, etc., to power our factories. But we then talked about the fact we don't really have factories anymore in the UK. They've all moved abroad because it's cheaper to base your factory in another country. So from the peak here downwards, this is called de-industrialization, and it literally translates as the opposite of industrialization. So the growth of industry is industrialization, and the decline is de-industrialization. Well, in exactly the same way that losing your primary sector causes problems, so does losing your secondary sector, and they're pretty much the same problems, but ladies and gents, they are in a different place. which is of course what the module is all about. This module is called Changing Places, and it's the idea, fairly obviously, that places change over time for all sorts of reasons. But this is where we're sort of linking all of this economic stuff back to what the module's all about. The decline of the primary sector affects rural areas. We've talked about that. We will, of course, revise it, but we have talked about that. This is what we're talking about today. The decline of secondary sector affects inner city areas. Now, next lesson, I will be digging some maps out to show you properly, face to face, what different parts of urban areas look like on maps. But you may remember I introduced them to you, and we said in the centre, you've got the central business district, which is in the middle, central, where the businesses are, district. But the other kind of giveaway clue is that your buildings are very tall in the CBD. Because land is expensive, your buildings tend to go upwards. The next area around it is called the inner city. And the inner city is very high density terraced housing, meaning all of the houses are joined together, squashed in, really, you know, everything is squashed in as much as possible. Possibly some old factory buildings. They may have been demolished and replaced by blocks of flats, but this is the part that we are talking about today. And as we move on through the module, we will move on to these other two. But it's just a reminder, really, that everything we're talking about does link back to places, because that's what the module is all about. Okay, so here we come to a cut and stick or copying out exercise, whichever you want. And of course you can do this actually in reality, or you can do it using the electronic version of cutting and pasting. I'm really not bothered. So on page 39 of your module booklet, I will show you, there are some words and phrases, these ones, okay? And what you are going to do is either you're going to maybe print this out or photocopy it. I know not all of you will have the ability to do that, which is why copying them out is absolutely fine. What you're going to do is you're going to use these phrases to create a spiral of decline. And can I please emphasize this? I appreciate that some of you in the class will have to make it neat or beautiful because that's the way you work. But I would just like to say that it doesn't have to be, all right? That's your personal choice. It may end up looking a bit like one of those. It may end up looking a bit like that or that. Honestly, it doesn't matter, okay? The end product that you are creating is much less important than the thought process of how these things link together, all right? And if you are completely confused, notice that these last three are actually the spiral of decline, so you can use these as a little bit of inspiration if you want to. There's not really a right or a wrong answer, firstly, but I will give you a couple of clues. So this is the starting point. And I've chosen a cellophane factory because one of your case studies for this is Bridgewater, which isn't very far away. And the trigger for the spiral of decline in Bridgewater was that. It was the fact that a cellophane factory closed. In reality, it can be any kind of factory, but I just thought that had a little bit more relevance because it linked to one of your case studies. So that is the starting point. And pretty quickly, you can imagine that if a factory closes, people are going to lose their jobs, aren't they? So then you need to look at these phrases and you need to think, okay, so what? People have lost their jobs. What might happen next? And you can look through them and you can start to think about it. And then you can think, okay, so if that happens, what might happen next? And that's the way to kind of go into this, is to think, right, if that happens, what could possibly happen next? And what, and as I said, if you get completely stuck, you could have a look at some of these ones for a bit of inspiration. Not these two, because these are completely random examples I just found off the internet to give you a sense of what it might end up looking like. Okay, so remember, the end product is much less important than the thought process that you put into doing this. And if any of you want to work together on this, so you might want to set up a Microsoft Teams chat or a FaceTime or something with somebody else in your class, I think that would be a really good idea, because if we were doing this normally, so to speak, I would absolutely be recommending that you discuss this with the people around you and like, what do you think would happen next? So that is the next part. And then the final part of today's lesson, which will require a few videos and things like that, I'm going to introduce you to your 3 case studies of the spiral of decline in inner city areas. Why are we doing 3? Well, because each of them brings something different to the party, really. Not because I'm mean and want to give you extra work to do, but actually I know for the purposes of your exams that having 3 will give you an advantage. So I'm not being mean, I promise. And for that, I need to skip to a different PowerPoint, and I will give you access to both of these PowerPoints so you can use them however you wish to. Right, so 3 case studies. Some of the notes are in the module booklet. Let me just show you. So there's your spiral of decline. There's a little mention of Bridgewater there. And then there's a little mention of Detroit. And there's a little mention of Glasgow. So they are your 3. Bridgewater, Somerset, Detroit, America, Glasgow, Scotland. Okay, so that you do have a little bit in there. But you also have got quite a lot of stuff on here, which will be helpful to you. Obviously, as I hope I said at the beginning, but I may have forgotten, feel free to pause this, rewind it, go back over it if you need to. That's absolutely fine. Right, Bridgewater. So, cellophane, in case you've never heard of it, is this stuff. It's sort of like cling film, but it's kind of harder, if you like. It doesn't tightly fit things. It's a packaging material. And essentially it tells you this in your module booklet. There was an American cellophane factory and there was a British one, and the company decided that they needed to close one of the factories and asked, told the respective governments, you know, we're going to have to close one of them. And the American government gave the company a significantly better offer. And so the company kept the American one open and closed the Bridgewater one. And the problem of that is it led to 250 people being made unemployed very, very quickly. And what you need to think about for your spiral of decline, and just for this case study generally, that's 250 families who now have one person, or possibly 2, but definitely 1, not earning any money. And hopefully this hasn't happened to your family, but just imagine if it did. If within a relatively short period of time, the income of your household was reduced by one person's salary, that's going to have quite profound effects, I would have thought. Now, if it happened to my family, so if me or my husband lost our jobs, it would, it would cause all sorts of difficulties financially. We'd be spending significantly less money in the local economy. We'd be cutting back on all sorts of things. So that's the problem, okay? Closure of factory, loss of jobs. And in the case of Bridgewater, it was a cellophane factory. This is where it is. Well, it's just the old industrial site. For those of you that know Bridgie, that's where we're talking about. It's now, I think it's housing for Hinkley Point workers right now, but that's where it was. And This is not a photograph taken by me. I am not a parkour expert who goes to abandoned factories. Don't worry, this is not my alter ego. I think you would faint if you even thought it was. But yeah, it's abandoned. Okay, so you are not going to be doing a massive case study for any of these. There is a reason that you need 3, and it's all linked with the exam board, but none of them are massive. So for Bridgewater, we are going to sort of focus, if you like, on the deprivation levels. Now, if you are deprived of something, it means you don't have it. So deprivation is a bad thing, okay? And you don't need to get bogged down in the detail of this, but I think for me, this really hit home just how bad life can be. So in the area, I've tried to be a little bit vague. In the area around the factory, so there are 36 households which don't fall into any of these categories, which is great. There are 35 households where one of these things is true. Either any member of the household is either unemployed or long-term sick. So you've got one person who's not able to work, or nobody has at least level 2 education. That's GCSEs. So nobody in that household has GCSEs. Or somebody in that household has got very bad health, or the household is overcrowded / has no central heating. Now, I think you would agree that any one of these could cause issues for a household, and there are 35 households in this area where one of these things is true. There are 21 households where 2 of these things are true. There are 7 households where 3 of these things are true, and there is 1 household where all of those are true. There are quite high levels of deprivation in this particular area of Bridgewater. Okay, and then you can have a look at this yourself. So yes, there is a postcode. There are other postcodes that this is applicable for, but it just happened to be one that I sort of focused on. And you can just see we're definitely in a city look, because the houses are mainly terraced. So that's a good clue that we're definitely talking in a city. I know Bridgewater's a town, but the name still works. And then you've got some information about that. Right, people. Now this is quite an interesting one. You don't need to understand these particularly. AB are the most skilled, highest paid jobs, and as you go down, you get down to the lower skill, lower paid jobs. And unfortunately, virtually half of the jobs in this area are unskilled, either on state benefit or unemployed. So these people are probably not earning huge amounts of money, is what that would suggest. I don't think... Oh yeah, health. There's quite a significant chunk there of not fantastic. Oh, this is the one I wanted to show you. Look, this pink section... This is the chunk of people who have no GCSEs or equivalent. Red is 1 to 4 GCSEs. So the vast majority are sort of limited as to what kind of jobs they can do by their levels of education. There is absolutely a relationship between that and that. Because, of course, jobs have requirements of what they want people to have achieved. And low levels of education really can exaggerate problems with deprivation. And then you can click and have a look at the crime if you want to, and by all means, you know, have more of a look around. 94.1% of English postcodes, i.e. pretty much the whole of the UK, is having a better time of it than this part of Bridgewater. That's just crazy, isn't it, really? And it's pretty much all caused by the closure of a factory. And I know that's a bit mind-boggling, but it's just to try and really get home to you the power of this spiral of decline. It's a really awful process. This then is just some facts, some data for the local school. So you can see that unfortunately in pretty much, no, in fact in all of the things that they are measured by the government, this particular school has got lower standards. And it's often quite surprising to people that the spiral of decline will affect standards of education. And I will explain this to you fully in class, but it absolutely does, because if people grow up in an area where education may be not particularly valued, or they just see that there aren't particularly many good jobs available, people begin to question the point of trying at school. And there's possibly an issue of not being encouraged, because you might need to be caring for one of your family members who is poorly, and that might lead to you having to miss quite a lot of school. It's quite a complex thing, but if the spiral of decline really kicks in and gets its teeth into an area, it will affect standards of education as well. Domestic violence is higher, permanent exclusions are higher. So, not a massive case study, but just a sense that the closure of a factory led to huge numbers of problems in this area. Okay? Then, Detroit. Detroit, as I've already said, there is a section in your module booklet, but you can learn quite a lot about Detroit using good old internet/YouTube. It's really good. Now, if I was stood in front of you today, I would be absolutely showing you these two, and then I would be saying you can watch these ones kind of if you want to. And if at the end of the lesson we'd have had a little bit of spare time, I would probably have started showing you this one. So I'm just going to give you a sense of what these are. So this is a BBC very short bit of news footage from the actual news. As you can see, it's only 2 minutes 38 seconds, and it will give you just an overview really of what we are talking about. So please watch that, because I definitely would have showed you that in class. And this one is from an American news channel. Oh, that's a slightly depressing thing, isn't it? So this is from the NBC Nightly News, and it's their explanation of what's happened to Detroit. And look, if we read the description, how the city went from the richest in America to the most poverty-stricken. Detroit's population is at nearly a quarter of what it was at its peak, and despite a recent wave of gentrification, the city is still struggling with rampant crime, a failing school system, and swathes of vacant land. It kind of puts the whole case study in a bit of a nutshell for you. All right, so that would be really good. Right, this one is optional, but brilliant. So this is a Stacey Dooley, and I should just say this is the YouTube version, this is the BBC, because the problem with iPlayer is that things disappear. So at the moment we're fine, we've got 3 months left, but at some point in the future it will have to be the YouTube version. So Stacey Dooley goes off to investigate the problems of Detroit and the homeless issues and all of that kind of stuff. It is good. There is some fairly strong language in it at times. It would have been played definitely after the watershed. If you can cope with a little bit of bad language, I think it's really informative, really interesting. And as I'm slightly biased to Stacey Dooley because I think she's fabulous, but she tends to get to the heart of the issue and put it in a very human context, rather than like a geography case study, which is just a bit, I don't know, impersonal sometimes. She puts it in a really easy to relate to way, I think. This one comes at it from a completely different perspective, and I just thought you might quite like it. I'll wait for the ad to end.
It's not that easy.
Oh,
Grammarly can help.
Hang on.
This sentence is grammatically correct.
Thank you, Grammarly. Okay, so you might have remembered when I showed you the photograph of the factory in Bridgewater, I was like, don't worry, I'm not some sort of parkour person that goes around abandoned buildings. That's really not my alter ego. Well, this person is that. That is exactly what they do. So this guy, as you can see, there's huge amounts of information just in this description that you could use for your case study. So it's brilliant. But one of the factors, or one of the key things you need to know about Detroit is huge depopulation. I mean, massive. We've already heard it's probably lost about 3/4 of its population, and the people who are left behind are in some sort of fairly serious situations. But because 3/4 of the population have left, there are thousands of abandoned buildings, like huge areas of just emptiness. And this guy goes around and films it and takes photographs, and this is his documentary all about it. It's a bit frustrating because it's punctuated by adverts, which I guess is how he gets his funding. But personally, I really enjoyed it. So, yeah. Watch some videos. Definitely these two. This one is optional, but I think worth it. This one is fantastic. And if we had have had time at the end of today's lesson, I probably would have showed you. I'd have started showing it to you. Okay. So there's just, yes, the population decreased. You don't need to learn that graph. It's just to get across the point that they have had massive depopulation and huge numbers of abandoned buildings. So it's slightly different. Notice Bridgewater's about deprivation. This one is depopulation and vacant buildings and crime. Some of the highest crime rates in the US. You'll see this in any of the documentaries that you watch. The murder rate is 10 times that of New York. It's been named the most dangerous city in America for the 4th year in a row. This is a city with some pretty serious problems. That's just a nice depressing note to finish on. For me, I don't think anything gets across the spiral of decline better than Detroit. I personally find it the one that's just like, I find it quite depressing, and I also find it just like, whoa, the spiral of decline really hits home as to how serious it can be. Glasgow is it's not a walk in the park either. But for Glasgow, can you focus on health? So Bridgewater's focus is deprivation, Detroit is kind of depopulation, abandoned buildings, crime, and Glasgow is the health aspects. And I've given you some information there. There's some in your module booklet. Don't learn all of these statistics because there's just too many. But I found this really helpful because it put it in a way that I could comprehend, I think. So Springburn is the part of Glasgow that we are focusing on. And what they have done is they've said, look, if there were 100 children in Springburn, 34 would live below the poverty line. Now that's a good chunk of 100, isn't it? 34 kids would live below the poverty line. And then it goes on to give you examples of how sort of much worse it is for some of those kids. And maybe just pull out one or two of those that, I don't know, hit home to you for some reason. This is a lot of horrible information, but I think for me it kind of summed it all up. Because it was about actual people, it was a way that I could relate to. So it's just a story about one family and what happened to them, and it just gets across how difficult life must be if you live in one of these areas affected by the spiral of decline. So I will leave you to read that. You can pause and read it. It kind of gets under your skin, actually. So this week's homework task, hopefully, won't require too much work, because hopefully it will just be Bridgewater, Detroit and Glasgow. But if you are a little behind, maybe, if you go right back to the front of the module booklet, there, I've listed the case studies. So we are here. So that means all of these up until this point really should be done. Home Place and St Paul's, I have had that in from the vast majority of you. So they are your first pair of case studies. Representation, Cornwall. I don't think anybody in my classes chose to do anywhere else, so you could cross that out and just leave Cornwall. Clark Fisher model stages, they are all in your module booklet already, and there's not a huge amount to know, but if you are talking about the Clark Fisher model, you can use these as examples for each stage. So we've got Malawi, China, South Korea and the UK. Rural rebranding was your choice. That was from last week. I don't know, Runwell Farm Shop, Creeley, the Eden Project, Glastonbury Festival. I gave you loads and loads of choices there. And there's an email that tells you what you need to know about them. And then today, I've introduced these three. So this week's homework is to make sure that you are up together with your case studies up until this point. Okay, now, as I said, I'll just remind you of a couple of things. Once I return from my appointment, I honestly don't know how long that will be. I will, of course, be checking emails. So if you get in a complete muddle about any of this, drop me an email, and as soon as I can, I will reply to you. And any sort of lingering issues, we can always pick up on them next lesson anyway. Okay, right, best wishes, ladies and gents. Good luck with it all.